Hi, everyone. My name's Jenn Tyler, and I'm your Senior Director of Government Affairs. I'm here to give you an update on one of the hottest topics going on right now in Congress, and what also happens to be one of our main policy areas that we're focusing on, permitting reform. I'm sure many of you have heard it in the news, and there's a ton of different proposals in Congress. So I want to give you a little bit of an update and talk about what Congress is working on, but also what we're working on here in CCL and what you can expect going forward. First, I'm sure many of you saw that Republicans passed H.R. 1. This was largely a Republican messaging bill that included their starting point for the permitting debate. Now, this was passed by the House, but it's not expected to move in the Senate because it was a partisan bill full of a lot of messaging priorities. That's pretty much okay with us. It definitely wasn't the type of permitting reform we wanted to see. There were a lot of provisions in there that we just would not be able to support. Since the passage of H.R. 1, we've seen Democrats in both the Senate and in the House introducing their own proposals to start the negotiations around permitting reform. Senator Manchin reintroduced his bill from the previous Congress. Representatives Casten and Levin in the House have introduced a permitting reform bill. And Senator Whitehouse, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with that name, has also introduced a permitting reform bill. Most recently, we've seen a couple of Republican senators introduce their proposals on permitting reform, Senator Capito and Senator Kramer, showing where some Senate Republicans are thinking and where they want to head this discussion on permitting reform. And just last week, President Biden released his own permitting reform priorities, and he stressed the need for Congress to work across the aisle to get this done, setting it as one of the top priorities for his administration. So there's a lot of ideas going around, a lot to digest, but we know there's even more coming. And that's great because it means we're ultimately working towards a solution. Members from both parties and the administration already are on board with getting this done. What we need to do is help steer this conversation in the right direction and get it across the finish line. So how are we going to do that? How are we going to steer it in the right direction? What exactly do we want out of this whole discussion? Well, we're advocating for permitting reform that maximizes benefits for the climate and also protects the health and safety in American communities. It's important that any permitting reform package does two things. One, it has to drive down carbon pollution by speeding up approval for good, clean energy projects. And two, it has to protect the health and safety of American people and communities. Without those two things, it's not going to be something Citizens Climate Lobby is going to be able to support. How do we achieve those goals? Well, there's a few specific policies we're interested in that we think are going to allow us to get to those two main objectives. One of the policies is to add to America's capacity to transmit clean electricity. As we have new clean electricity projects coming onto the grid, we have to be able to get that electricity to the population centers, largely from the center of the country to the coasts. So we have to have a transmission component to permitting reform. Second, we have to speed up the approval of clean energy projects that are waiting to be built. We can't wait a decade or more for a solar farm to be installed. We have to do that quicker. And third, one of the most important, we have to allow communities to make their voices heard on environmental and other impacts of proposed energy projects. This doesn't just mean making sure community engagement continues to exist, but it means making sure it's robust, making sure it's early in the project, and making sure that federal agencies are listening to it and responding to that community engagement in a timely and effective manner. We've been working on permitting reform since as soon as we realized how crucial it is to progress on climate change. There were estimates after the IRA that without permitting reform, we wouldn't see up to 80% of those emissions reductions that we were expecting from the IRA. We would not see any of those without permitting reform. So after that, a few weeks ago, during our conservative conference, we lobbied on permitting reform. Conservative CCLers from across the country came to DC and they lobbied on these exact policies I'm talking to you about today. And we heard many, many great receptions from Republicans talking about the need to work with Democrats to get this done. So now's our chance, as the debate continues to heat up, More members on all sides of the aisle are chiming in, and the administration is chiming in with their own priorities. Now is our time to hit the halls of Capitol Hill, hit members of the Senate, members of the House, Democrats and Republicans, to push them to come together on permitting reform, to steer it in the right direction so that we're able to hit our emissions reductions targets, but we're also protecting American communities and the health and safety of our environment. So I hope you will join us in June and lobby with me on getting permitting reform done and so many other crucial policies. Looking forward to seeing you guys in June.